Hey, welcome fans, fanatics, and anyone cryptocurrency and or sports minded to episode 10 of our UFFS podcast. I'm Darren along with the Fish. How you doing, Fish?
Doing good, Darren. Thanks for having me back again. And good that we've made it to 10 episodes. That's exciting in itself. And lots to catch up on in the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League again to close out the month of October.
Absolutely, man. I'm sitting here relaxing. I feel like I'm refined. So I got my friends, that TV series Friends coffee mug here. I'm getting old. 10 episodes. I just feel like I just have to have a cigar and a coffee in my hand now.
Yeah, no, totally.
We're getting somewhere. Hey, and happy after Halloween. I have to tell you, I have a bit of a Halloween hangover. I just laid on the couch trying to hand out Halloween candy, which I'm going to get to in a minute. Was the weirdest Halloween candy handout I think I've ever done in my life, based on on the pandemic situation. So I laid on the couch in between the very few kids that came to my door, and I watched Halloween movies that were on TV, just one after another. And I know that Dean Millard of Duckman's Nomination would probably love that because he's a horror buff. So there you go, Dean. There's my Halloween shout out to you. How was it for you?
Yeah, I like a good horror movie too. So watched a bit of that. I played hockey on Halloween night, so that was fun. And we had a couple beers in the parking lot afterwards. Beer league hockey because you can't have any beers in the dressing room anymore. So that's strange too. But yeah, we played hockey on Halloween night, and nobody had any costumes on though. Everybody showed up in street clothes, so there wasn't too much fun on that front. And before hockey, I think same thing. I live in a townhouse complex, and we only had maybe two or three trick or treaters all night. So it was a pretty slow Halloween here in Kelowna.
Yeah, so on a typical year where I live, we would have anywhere from 80 to 140 kids, and we had 13, the unlucky 13 last night. So it was very unusual. And here I had a bench in front of my steps so nobody could get to the door. And I would go out and I had a mask on, and the mask you're supposed to wear for the pandemic. And I handed out the bags of candy with tongs. And it was just the weirdest feeling I think I've ever it was actually scary. It was a scary in itself is what it was. So it was a scary Halloween for me in many ways, but here we are, man. And that's why
Yeah.
fantasy sports is going to be so much fun, because we're going to be locked down. Hopefully this thing will go away soon, but in the meantime, we've got a lot of time to, I guess, to focus on our franchises, to watch what's going to happen in the various sporting arenas around the world, fans, no fans. And we're going to talk about some of that today. Also want to talk about on the agenda is a lot of things UFHL's been, even though the season is wrapped up, where I guess what we were doing in the last couple of weeks, Larry, is that you've been busy wrapping up the season with many various different things in the UFHL. And that'll, of course, take us into moving into the new season with some new tweaks, some new rule changes, had some owner meetings. So those are all done. Um, Maybe what we should do is we should talk about some of the bigger, or if you want to highlight some of the rule changes coming into the new season.
Yeah, so one thing we're doing for next season or next off season, I guess, is we're introducing free agency, which right now in the UFHL, you honor all NHL contracts. So if you have a player coming up for unrestricted free agency under the current rules or the initial rules, whatever team he signs with, whatever contract he gets, you automatically inherit that contract. But now starting next off season, when he comes up for free agency, you have the option of walking away or releasing that player into a free agent auction. And then when the day he signs his new contract with his new team, the rest of the franchises are able to bid on him. And you could bid on your own player back. But what it allows is some roster flexibility and certainly salary cap flexibility for the franchises. Much like in the NHL, they're allowed to walk away from players and spend that money elsewhere or allocate that salary elsewhere. So that's an important change. Buyouts as well, another thing that's changing. Initially, it was just a fee, but it made sense to mimic the NHL. As you know, the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League tries to mirror the NHL wherever possible. And so when it comes to buyouts, we're now going to introduce cap recapture, which is the same thing they do in the NHL. If you buy out a player, you retain salary on twice the remaining length of the contract at a reduced cap hit, but you do hold some of that salary. So you can't just trade for a player with a bad contract and then just get rid of him easily, right? If you buy him out, you're going to be stuck with some of his cap hit for a number of years going forward. So just a little bit more realism on the free agency and the buyouts. Those are two of the big things. Another thing, competition committee has officially been formed, 7 members, including myself and the 6 franchises that finished in 5th, 10th, 15th, 20th, 25th, and 30th place. So good cross section of the standings. But those managers or those franchise owners, as well as myself, will help take some pressure off the commissioner when it comes to ruling on trades. Will help the commissioner oversee trades. And if there's a controversial or, questionable trade or borderline trade, that'll come to the competition committee with 7 votes. And that's how some trade decisions will be made going forward. But aside from that, surprisingly, because like you said, there was upwards of 20 proposed changes that were tabled and discussed at the month-long owners meetings throughout October, and only a few changes. For the most part, a handful, or maybe I guess there was 10 of those topics or items, agenda items, made it to a voting process. And a number of them, surprisingly, or maybe not, despite the pushback and some of the changes that people were adamant about, the voting results ended up being largely status quo, with some of the contentious items such as cash and trades, which is obviously a unique thing for the UFHL. The NHL doesn't allow cash considerations, but the UFHL has a rule where you can add cash, or in our case, cryptocurrency and score coin, the in-game token, into a trade as a way to balance or sweeten the trade. So that was kind of the rule for the initial season. And some people wanted more of the cash to go into the prize pool, which would kind of be a deterrent to doing cash trades. But the vote was fairly close. But in the end, status quo remains, where 80% of cash ends up, or crypto ends up, with the franchise owner who's receiving it, and only 15% to the prize pool. So from that standpoint, I feel like the voting results, all in all, were quite well received. And from the feedback I've got, everybody's accepted the results, and they're happy to transition into the 2020-21 UFHL season starting tomorrow officially.
Awesome. Yeah. So if I think about it, and from a guy who's never played fantasy sports like myself, it's pretty key to have that flexibility to be able to buy out some of these contracts, I would think, right? I mean, if you got a guy that you've got on your roster that signed a contract for $700,000, but all of a sudden, he's become a superstar and signs for $3 million, that's a big hit to your whole franchise, right?
It is. And again, we're using the exact same salary cap as the NHL, both the ceiling and the floor. And it's difficult to fit, the salary cap is going to be one of the biggest challenges for the franchises in the UFHL, and managing that, right? Because like I said, there's going to be guys that get big raises, or, potentially go the other way with older players could see their salaries go down. And there's a lot of foresight you need to have as an owner, but this allows those owners and GMs to see it coming and to release the player and then react accordingly. And perhaps you have, like I said, a $7 million player you release into the free agent auction next offseason, and you can spend that $7 million. You can go in and buy a $4 million forward and a $3 million defenseman, and end up with 2 roster players instead of 1. Of course, you have to spend out of pocket to bring in those new additions, where you could have kept the $7 million player without any fee. But nonetheless, it's competitive fantasy sports. It's high stakes, and people are willing to spend to improve their roster. And I think we'll see that through the UFHL free agency, as well as the buyouts, much like we see it in the NHL.
I like the fact that this league is really coming together. All franchises are now owned. I'm really excited about the next season, where we're going to actually be able to see all these tweaks, rule changes come into effect, which is, as of recording today, is November 1st. Tomorrow, November 2nd, is the first official day of the brand new UFHL season, right?
It is. And today, to kick it off, we have the Buyouts Auction happening tonight, runs through tomorrow evening, but that's exciting. Drew Doughty is sort of the headliner, or he highlights the list of 31 players that were bought out under the initial rules, which didn't include cap recapture. It was just a fee that had to be paid to buy somebody out. But knowing that there'll be cap recapture next season, next off season, a lot of franchises took advantage of the window that they had with the current rule and paid that fee to release. Like I said, up to 31 players are available for auction, and Drew Doughty's a big name. Guys like Pekka Rinne. There's a number of quality players there. some depth players as well, but there's certainly a handful of guys that are going to get some action in that buyouts auction over the next 24 hours. Some franchises have been trading too in the last couple of days to free up cap space, which in my opinion, you're going to see that cap space reallocated to some of these players available in the buyouts auction. So they freed up space, much like an NHL team would ahead of free agency or a buyout period. And now they're going to go target some of those players. So it'll be interesting to see the bidding wars on a guy like Drew Doughty, who does have a big contract. He's owed $11 million for the next 7 seasons. So, I mean, that's a hefty contract to take on when the salary cap's only $81.5 million at the ceiling. He's taken up more than 1/10 of your salary cap in one player, and you got a 23-man roster. So it's a big contract to take on, but he's a superstar player and he's still in his prime. So, and the Los Angeles Kings are trending up. So I would be surprised if there weren't a number of franchises in the bidding and in the bidding war tomorrow evening on Drew Doughty.
It's amazing to see, the transactions guys take, or franchise owners take to relieve cap space, to allow for cap space for opportunities like this. And that's what makes this so cool to try and understand the strategy, which I'm still trying to learn the strategy on what these franchises and general managers put into this. And it's fascinating. It's almost a full-time job, Larry. I don't know how these guys do it, but they have minds like yours where they know what they're doing. It probably only takes them a half an hour, but there has to be considerable time put into managing a franchise, I think. And that's why having a good GM is important, in my opinion. I know if I had a franchise, I would have a GM right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of franchises have GMs. A lot of them have assistant GMs in charge of contracts. A lot of them have assistant GMs mainly looking at day-to-day roster lineup setting. Some have assistant GMs doing the scouting side, right? Actually quite a few of the franchises have hired head scouts. The guys that were independent scouts to start are now affiliated with franchises and allowing them to kind of direct traffic on which prospects to target and how to go about that for the entry auction, which just passed, as well as the open market. So certainly we're seeing not too many franchises are just one-man shows anymore. A lot of the franchises, probably at least half, have at least 2 people, an owner and a GM, or an owner and a co-owner. Some have multiple people in the ownership group. I think Rock Republic's got up to 8 people in their sort of inner circle, some scouts, some assistant general managers. So certainly people are delegating roles and tasks amongst themselves. Because like I said, it's a lot for one manager to take on or one owner to take on. But it is interesting. And you mentioned the strategy. I think there's 31 franchises. There might be 20 different strategies at play. And it's interesting to see those strategies evolve. And some of the teams, it's hard to get a read on what their strategy is, because one day they look like they're going in one direction, and the next day maybe they're freeing up salary. So lots of wheeling and dealing. We've seen a bunch of blockbuster trades in the last few days. Braden Point on the move again. He was part of the Klein Cup champion roster and then was traded following the playoffs, and he was flipped again now to another trade that got Braden Point fetched Thomas Hertl and Torrey Krug. So that was a big blockbuster, and we've seen a number of trades over the last month. So even though there's no gameplay and the NHL season's 2 months away, these franchises are still as busy as ever shaping their roster for the season to come.
So the Braden Point flipping around, that would mostly be a cap space play, or what would that be about?
I think what happened there was Strong Island has targeted certain players that they really want to build around. One right off the bat was Rasmus Dahlin. It was, I want this guy. I'm willing to pay what it takes to get him. And Terry Weber was successful in landing Rasmus Dahlin. And then, he goes after a guy like Philip Forsberg, where he's willing to trade Patrice Bergeron, who you're real familiar with, top line center for the Boston Bruins. But he is 35 years old and, might not have a ton of good years left, but could be valuable come Legends League as well. But trades Patrice Bergeron and a first round pick to get Philip Forsberg, who's 10 years younger and, maybe has some upside, still just getting into his prime. And then again, turns around and is willing to trade Thomas Hertl and Torrey Krug, 2 valuable players, for Braden Point. So I think what we're seeing there is the core group of Strong Island is taking shape by Terry Weber really setting his sights on certain targets and making sure he acquires those players, even if it costs some depth. But certainly there was some cap savings there as well, because I think Braden Point, when you add up Torrey Krug and Thomas Hertl, they add up to almost twice as much as Braden Point's salary. Point's a little bit younger than those guys. So maybe we see Strong Island circle back into the bidding war for Drew Doughty as well, now that they freed up that cap space. But so you're right, it could be a cap consideration thing, but certainly I think it's as much as anything, it's targeting certain players and doing whatever it takes to land them.
So Strong Island building a team. Somebody's got to take on Red Army here. So it's good to see that they're building something to be competitive because, well, I don't know. I don't know what to say, but I think Red Army has a pretty good chance for next season, but he's also willing to wheel and deal. So anything can change. Really anything can change.
Yeah, I think Red Army has obviously invested the most into the platform or into the UFHL so far from a financial standpoint, and the roster and protected list is impressive as a result. It reflects the financial flexibility that he's been able to use and kind of flex his financial muscle to improve his roster and protected list. But again, there's a salary cap and you can only fit so much under there. And actually Red Army's closer to the floor than the ceiling, believe it or not, because a lot of those players are young players on entry-level contracts that are still cheaper, but 2-3 years from now, Red Army is going to be facing a big-time cap crunch, and they're going to have to maneuver their roster as well. But I think you're right. I think they're in a good position to take a run at winning back some of that money in this coming season.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about today. As a recording, November 1st is the deadline for all fees to wrap up this past season. Fees are necessary to run anything these days. I mean, you pay your fee for your kids' hockey, you pay for this, you pay for that, but this is really necessary to know that we do have franchises engaged. It's not an expensive fee. We're talking $200 US just to participate in the season, to show that you're committed. And of course, if you participated in the auctions, which most did, and you purchase players or prospects, those have to be paid for too, because it's totally unfair, obviously, if you haven't paid that and you're kind of riding along on the coattails. What are the repercussions if you don't pay the fees?
Yeah, if you don't pay the fees, the entry fee as well as, well, any of the fees, you get a 10% fine on whatever you owe. So you're automatically then owing more based on that 10% fine. So if, say, the league fee, the entry fee, $200, well, 10%, now it's $220 you owe tomorrow if you don't pay today. And again, with the prospect fees, if you only paid $25, well, it's only $2.50. It's not a big blow, but again, it's extra money. It's a deterrent for people to not miss deadlines, not miss payments. But you hit the nail on the head by saying the word commitment and dedication. That's what this is all about, is making sure that these franchise owners are invested in the platform and the UFHL going forward. And so there are fees and there are deadlines and certain things, payments that need to be made in order to show that commitment and to get everybody ready to transition into that 2020-21 UFHL season starting tomorrow. And I think for the most part, all fees are pretty much paid up. So there was no real concerns on that front. There might be a couple franchises left, but hopefully by midnight tonight, everybody's paid up. There are no fines to speak of, and everybody's in good shape going into next season. And you look at the rosters, I mean, there's a lot of parity in the UFHL right now. Even though we highlighted a team like Red Army, I wouldn't necessarily say they're the favorite right now. I think they're in that pack of 15 plus teams that could be in the money. And as we saw with the prize pool, there's a revenue sharing model kind of through the prize pool as well. And in the inaugural UFHL season, it was winner takes all, only one payout. But going forward, the franchises voted on finalizing the prize pool. And the way it's going to work, every franchise from 1 to 32 is going to get a piece of the pie. Obviously, number 1 is going to get more than number 32 and work its way down. But there's incentive to finish one spot higher because it is a bigger payout for the upcoming UFHL season. So we're going to see a lot of franchises tweak their rosters over the next couple of months before opening night and before that roster deadline for the UFHL NHL season. But a lot of teams are in a very competitive position going forward. And I think the parity is exciting. And again, that's the salary cap, the great equalizer that's keeping all these franchises very close together as far as roster caliber. And it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out once the puck drops, hopefully on January 1st.
Well, I certainly hope everybody gets paid up. I know there's been a ton of reminders and in all the Telegram chats. So there's really no reason to not heed the deadlines, I guess, so to speak. So UFHL, I think we kind of took care of most of the important things that are up and coming. Is there any other necessary important details that that owners, GMs, and scouts might need to know about coming up in the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, so I guess one thing we can talk about that I forgot to mention with what happens if you don't pay for your prospects, you will forfeit those draft picks from the entry auction or those picks you made in the scout draft, and those prospects will go to auction. So, and that would start on Tuesday and end on Wednesday. So it would be the entry auction prospects, if they're not paid for, they'll be auctioned off to all 31 franchises. So if you don't pay for a first round pick, somebody else who already had 2 picks can pick up a third one through that auction. It'll be available to the highest bidder. And likewise for the scout draft, if you don't pay for your prospects or you don't like who you picked there and you back away from them, you pay a 10% fine for leaving them on the table, and they're then available for auction. And there are going to be 7 prospects, I believe. The Monarchs affiliated scout Matt Murray, I think he ran it by his dad, Al Murray, and they didn't necessarily like the way the scout draft shook out. They didn't see prospects that they felt are going to become impact players in the NHL, and maybe they could reallocate that money better on regroup and target some different prospects. So they stepped back from that group of 7, and those 7 prospects, I guess, headlined by Columbus defense prospect Samuel Nashko, who was a 3rd round pick in the NHL draft. He's likely, if and when the WHL season gets going and they allow import players, he's projected to come overseas and play for the Seattle Thunderbirds in the Western Hockey League. So exciting puck-moving defenseman. He sort of was their first round pick there, but a number of interesting prospects that will be available to the scouts only on a scout auction on Tuesday. So there are some potential auctions coming up besides the buyout auction this coming week, but generally speaking, November, December is going to be the months to really shape your roster and get ready for that roster deadline. Make sure you got your cap situation under control. And when the NHL roster deadline happens a couple weeks or a week before opening night in the NHL season, so will the UFHL. And once that puck drops, there'll be some fireworks amongst these 31 franchises. And as you know, come January 1st, likely, or early 2021, the expansion franchise auction will begin, and that's going to be upwards of a 2-month process where we introduce a 32nd franchise owner and mirroring the Seattle expansion process in the NHL. So that's exciting on the horizon in the new year, in the first quarter of 2021. That's sort of the next big event for the UFHL will be the franchise expansion franchise auction, followed obviously by the expansion draft where they get to pick their team, which will take place in the off season around next year's entry auction, same date as the NHL expansion draft likely. So that's an exciting thing to come in 2021. But right now it's just get those rosters set and make sure your cap situation's under control. Maybe spend a little bit in the buyouts auction and just really focus on being ready to go when the puck drops, whatever that is, whether it's January 1 or February 1, remains to be seen in the NHL.
So you brought up a good point to me because I never really thought of it that way. So not only the Matt Murray example that you brought up, not only is it a negligent payer, as I had surmised this might be in effect, but it's strategy too, right? So you forego the 10%, you're probably better off to put these players back out there and search for something better.
Yeah, it's an option, right? Because the way that round 3 to 7 draft worked for the scout draft, they were basically submitting lists in advance, and then it was just sort of auto processed as to which player off your list was the highest when it got to your pick spot each round. And they submitted for 7 picks, and just the way the chips fell, or however you want to say it, the way the prospects tumbled in the draft order, they weren't super happy with their results, and they decided, let's throw them back and reallocate these funds and target specific prospects that are still out there. And obviously when you got a guy like Al Murray in your corner, the director of scouting, assistant general manager for the Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning, he has an off season now too. Maybe he's got a little time to filter through that scout list and see who's out there. And it'll be interesting to see where they reallocate those funds if the Monarchs remain in the UFHL, because they're also entertaining some potential franchise sale. Talk about selling high. If you sell on the Klein Cup champion, that could be a big profitable sale for Ashley Murray and the Monarchs as well. So we'll see where that franchise goes in the coming weeks, but certainly Al Murray in your corner, it doesn't get much better than that as far as scouring the open market and targeting certain prospects.
I heard that rumor about the Monarchs. I didn't know if we were allowed to talk about that or not. But one thing we should point out is that franchises are for sale at any point in time, always, right? It's no different than, if somebody asks me if my house is for sale, and it's always for sale for the right price, right? I mean, that's life.
Yeah, everybody has a price. And the interesting thing is once we're on the blockchain, once we launch on Zilliqa, there will be a sale block where franchises can essentially list your house, list your franchise. Here's the minimum I'm willing to take. And if somebody makes that offer, you can choose to accept it. And again, every franchise is available at all times on the blockchain. Right on your franchise page, there'll be an option for any fans or scouts or people that aren't currently franchise owners, because you can only own one franchise, but anybody from the outside can make a bid on any franchise at any time. And like I said, everybody has their price. So I think it will be interesting to see where we're at next offseason, a year from now, how many of the original 31 franchises are still with their original owner, because there's going to be a lot of new money and new interest once the UFHL and UFF Sports is launched with the Zilliqa blockchain. And there will certainly be some enticing offers coming forward for franchises that maybe only spent a couple $100s to get into the UFHL. They could, we just saw one franchise sold for a 10 times 10 profit, right? Justin Davis and the power players, they bought in for $175 and cashed out for 2,400 Canadian dollars. The sale was 1,800, and they made a trade the day of the sale where they brought in another $600 as well. So you combine them, he made $2,400 Canadian on $175 US investment. So a nice profit in a matter of a few months. So you think where we could be a year from now, and that shows you what the franchises are going for. I mean, the people that are coming in at a $2,000 plus purchase price, they're going to be some serious players, and they're probably going to have some financial backing. So the sky is the limit, and we're just getting started as far as there will be franchise turnover. There will be new owners. That's inevitable with the startup, and the platform is going to grow, and the UFHL will continue to grow and continue to prosper in the coming months.
So when we talk about Zilliqa and the platform launch coming up here, hopefully before the end of the year, I can't even curtail my excitement, actually, Larry. What I've seen in terms of some of the, if you want to call it a straw dog landing pages, where they put examples together and show it to us. It looks phenomenal. It looks amazing. It's going to be so crisp, so refreshingly easy to understand. It just looks amazing. It's going to take us absolutely global. We're global already, but are we in the cryptocurrency world? Maybe not as much as we'd like to be, right? And this is where you see the investments coming. These guys have, they want places to put their cryptocurrency, and it's going to be really amazing to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I've had a hand in sort of shaping some of the website and sort of make sure we're all on the same page with the Zilliqa developers and how it's going to come together. And like I said, it's super exciting, and I can't wait to release it to the world, and certainly to the UFHL community, UFFS community, so they can see truly what they signed up for, and where the direction of the platform going forward and how it's all going to work. So right now, it's largely being conducted behind the scenes, sort of in a spreadsheet type environment. But once we're on the blockchain, it's going to be next level stuff. And I think everybody's going to be that much more excited about the future of UFFS and the UFHL.
Absolutely. So Larry, let's talk a little bit. I've been reading some stuff about the upcoming NHL season, and it's all over the map. There's so many different things going on in all levels of hockey and all levels of sports, but we're primarily focused around hockey right now. But I'm trying to get my head around the NHL, looking at an all-Canadian league, an all-American league, and I guess that's probably due to border crossings. I'm not actually sure why they're proposing it, but I wanted to get the Fish's thoughts on some of these things. What are your thoughts on this idea?
Yeah, they've talked about two different bubbles within Canada, or just one bubble where all 7 Canadian teams are in the same city for an extended period of time, right? With the playoffs, you might be out in one series, but if you're playing 60 games, that's a long time in one place without family and stuff. So it'll be interesting how that evolves. They're having NHL owners meetings and competition committee, NHL competition committee meetings in the coming weeks to help decide some of that. And obviously the American election is looming, and that result could have an impact on border closures and their response to COVID south of the border as well. So that could change some things as far as the path forward for the NHL. I think that's why they're not making any announcements with the American election looming. But I think in the coming weeks, within a month, we're going to have a better idea of the schedule. And I do think it'd be exciting for an all-Canadian division. But I mean, the Battle of Alberta was as heated as it's been in a number of years last season already. And now you put them in the same hotel in the same city and playing, you know, every second week you play the same teams. So yeah, it would be very intense to have a Canadian bubble, but certainly I think it would do great for TV ratings and for rivalries. That side of it would be good. And hopefully we could get some fans in the building at some point throughout the season as well.
So selfishly, I kind of like it. I like the competitive nature, as you say, those big rivalries, the Leafs versus the Canadians, obviously the Oilers and the Flames. But on the TV ratings, do you think that what about the American side? Would they lose out? Would there be, obviously the Canadians are going to be glued to their TVs watching the Canadian League, but are we going to lose sight of those American franchises? And what's that going to do on the TV rating side? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think the Sportsnet, the Canadian TV ratings will certainly favor the Canadian bubble or the Canadian division. But I think most Canadians especially are hockey fans first and foremost. And most of the American franchises have at least half their roster are Canadian-born players. So I think there'll be plenty of interest north of the border. Any hockey on TV is better than what we currently have, which is unfortunately no hockey on TV for the next couple months. So I think the TV ratings will be good. And like I said, hopefully there'll be people and scouts as well as fans in the buildings. Right now, there's not at any level in North America. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But certainly, I think TV ratings will do well because it's better than what the current options are on television. For anybody who enjoys hockey, they'll tune in, whether it's a U.S. division game or a Canadian division game.
You know, so you look at this pandemic and no fans attending these games, and if you try and find positives out of the negatives, and one positive I kind of seen discussed is that perhaps the NHLers that maybe don't have an appreciation for fans will certainly find the appreciation on having the fans back in the building to generate those revenues that they need for those big contracts. So I think that's going to be, I think you're going to see a lot of fan appreciation come back if we can get fans back in the building. What do you think is going to happen? Are there going to be fans? And I mean, this is just guesswork, of course, fish for you, but do you think if we get these bubbles done right, fans will be allowed to come back? And do you think the fans will come back?
I think the fans are eager to come back. I think if there was an NHL game in Winnipeg tomorrow night, it would sell out. And if it was 50% capacity and the tickets were twice as much as a normal ticket, if they were $500 instead of $250 to go to the game, I think it would still sell out at half capacity. I think people love hockey and they're eager to get back to live entertainment, whether it's concerts or sporting events. I think people are feeling a bit cooped up, a bit restricted as to what they can do. And many of us are stuck at home on the couch a lot of our days. I think people are eager to get back out. So I think the fans will certainly welcome the league back and be eager to get back in the building and see a good quality product again with the NHL returning. And whether or not we see fans, though, like I said, it's impossible to predict where this pandemic goes. It changes from week to week, month to month, and we're at least 2 months away, likely potentially 3 months away from the start of the next NHL season. So it's hard to predict where the numbers will go as far as COVID and how the pandemic will trend. But certainly I think people are eager to get back in the building. And I think the players, like you said, their realization of how much revenue comes from tickets, merchandise, parking, concessions, everything that goes with the live event. I think they're going to have a bit of a wake-up call to some that maybe didn't take their media responsibilities or their fan engagement responsibilities overly seriously and didn't realize how their paychecks were maybe paid, because the NHL franchise owners have come out and said, or a number of them, in certain markets, 50% of their revenue, half the revenue, comes from fan-generated ticket sales, merchandise, concession, parking, all that stuff. And you take all that away, and we're looking at a salary rollback for the players. They're not going to be able to make as much money going forward without the fans, so they need to welcome the fans back. But at the same time, I think people love hockey. The people that liked hockey before still are eager and anticipating the return, and I think there'll be people will come out in droves, providing, again, it depends a little bit on people's own financial situations too, because a lot of people have had their salaries reduced or their roles A lot of people have lost jobs through this pandemic as well. So it'll be interesting, but in my opinion, there's enough people that'll fill the building to whatever capacity the health officials and the NHL allows for.
There's always new fans out there waiting for their chance to get a seat at some of these games. And in some of these arenas, it's impossible pretty much to get a ticket to a game. So it might be refreshing for those that have never really had that opportunity. It's going to be really interesting. And yes, I think that fans are extremely eager to get back in and see these games live. Hey, I wanted to, another thing they're talking about is this is going to be really interesting for strategy in the UFHL and any fantasy sports platform anywhere. The goalie tandems coming up, a shortened season, going to be, it's going to be a lot of quick games. How do you utilize your goalies? Is it going to be important to have 3 goalies on your roster? I'm not sure how this is going to play out.
It is going to be important to have 3, maybe 4. Look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. They got Frederick Anderson, who could become a trade chip at some point because he's in the final year of his contract. But they also have Jack Campbell, who they traded for last year. And then this offseason, they went and signed Aaron Dell and Michael Hutchinson. So they're 4 deep in goalies with NHL experience. And a lot of NHL franchises are at least 3 deep right now, and signing a veteran goalie that can certainly step up, because I think fatigue and injury is going to be a real factor for goalies, because they are going to be playing at least every second night, and there will be a number of more back-to-back situations than a typical season by the sounds of it, and again, if they're playing in a bubble, there may be a game where you play at 5 p.m. one night and noon the next day kind of thing. Like, it could be a quick turnaround, and in that case, you absolutely need a second goalie ready to go. So I think the importance of a platoon system, a 1A, 1B, and a tandem versus if they only play 60 games, I don't think you're going to see any starting goalie play 45 or 50 games like we have in some past seasons. I think one year Cam Talbot played 72 out of 82 games for the Oilers. I don't think we're going to see that kind of workload. I think it's going to be pretty 50-50. And you mentioned it. That's equally important and should be on the radar for the UFHL franchises as well, that you may need 2 goalies to rotate in and out this season. But at the same time, you got that expansion draft looming, and you can only protect 1 goalie. So you have to be careful as well from a roster management standpoint. Do you want to acquire 2 starting goalies or 2 good goalies? Because you probably can only keep one of them, and that whoever purchases that expansion franchise, whoever wins that auction, goaltending is going to be the strength, the position of strength, the easiest position to draft and build for, because you got 31 franchises. They can all only keep 1 goalie. So there's going to be 31 good goalies out there. And whoever gets the expansion franchise is going to be set in goal for probably their position of strength out of the gate. But at the same time, like I said, you do need 2 goalies going. And it's going to be interesting how they prioritize the win now mentality of I need 2 goalies to maximize my fantasy points versus I'm going to lose potentially one of these good goalies in the expansion draft. So there's pros and cons to having 2 goalies. There's a lot of strategy at play there. And the one nice thing for franchises is there will be a window after the Klein Cup playoffs, before the expansion draft, where we could see a real musical chairs of goalies and some shuffling there, with the teams that do have 2 goalies will be desperate to get rid of one of them because something is better than losing them for nothing to the expansion franchise. So, and we're going to see it in the NHL too. The goalies are going to be shuffled around quite a bit between now and the expansion draft, but certainly there are advantages to having 2 good goaltenders with the way the NHL schedule is predicted to be, with lots of back-to-backs and only a day off. You're going to have the goalie tandems, as you mentioned, will be a big priority in the NHL and likely in the UFHL as well.
Yeah, more chance for injuries with the tight schedule. Yeah, I never really thought of the aspect of spending big on adding goalies to your to your franchise, and then of course having to give it up in the expansion auctions expansion auctions. So that's something I never thought of. It's going to be interesting to see how that all develops. So what I thought we could finish off with today, Fish, on this. It's not NHL, but it's OHL, but everybody's talking about this big announcement in the OHL. And I really don't know what to think about it. It's one of these things where there's so many different rules for different aspects of whatever it is, whether it's industry or schools or hospitals or anything. And this is another one that's coming to the sports world where they're going to take what is almost a staple of how hockey's always been played since I've really ever known. And they're going to pull it out. And of course, we're talking about the aspect of not allowing hitting in the OHL this season.
Yeah, Lisa McLeod, the sport minister in Ontario, has come out and adamantly, she's been very active on social media, on Twitter, hammering home the point that there will be no body checking, no body contact in the Ontario Hockey League, the major junior OHL this coming season. They're looking at a February 4th start date, so that's still 3 months away, and that can change. But certainly Lisa McLeod has taken her stand against hitting in hockey at all levels in Ontario this coming season. But like people said, there's a lot of interesting things here. The Ottawa Senators and the Toronto Maple Leafs play in Ontario. Are they not allowed to hit if one of the bubbles is in Toronto and one's in Edmonton again? Is there no hitting for all those NHL teams in Toronto? Because why would they be treated any differently or any less at risk than a major junior team for contracting COVID? And then the other thing, the Memorial Cup, the CHL National Championship, which has the WHL champions, QMJHL champions, the OHL host team, and the OHL champions, is supposed to be hosted in Ontario in June. Well, is that going to be a non-contact tournament when the WHL and QMJHL have been playing contact hockey all year? I mean, it's unfathomable that they would go to a non-contact, no-hitting league. Personally, my opinion, Lisa McLeod's on a bit of a power trip here. She's sort of flexing her authority as a minister, both in health and sport, and saying that this is a health and a pandemic issue, which is above hockey. But again, you look at hockey in general, can you have a face-off? Can you have a board battle? What if the goalie's down and there's a scrum in front of the net? Like the amount of contact and the amount of close situations in hockey, you'd almost have to cancel the season. I don't think they can play without contact. And certainly any players that are draft eligible, top prospects for the 2021 NHL draft, they're already looking elsewhere. Where can we catch on in a contact league? Because it's hard for scouts to judge somebody on a number of levels as far as their skill level goes if there's no contact and they don't have to have their head up or prepare for contact. So it totally changes the game, the way it's played. And I can't imagine it comes to that. I think smarter heads, cooler heads will prevail by February 4th, and there will be regular rules if the OHL does play this season. I can't see them playing a non-contact major junior level hockey league. So in my opinion, Lisa McLeod's on a bit of a power trip right now, and the hockey community, including people like Bob McKenzie, have really called her out on this. And I'm guessing the Premier Doug Ford will be reanalyzing how they approach the OHL season, which they still have 3 months to decide. But I would be shocked if that declaration of no contact in the OHL holds up come puck drop for the OHL.
I got to tell you that it's certainly creating some discussion. I'm trying to visualize this, and it's really difficult to see it come to fruition. I can't even imagine these players that have played hit hockey ever since they've, probably been a certain age, how they can stop themselves from actually hitting another player, because that's just how they play the game. That's how they develop their skills. It's part of the game. And not only that, but how would they enforce such a thing? Do they issue them a penalty? I just can't imagine.
It would be, I'm guessing, similar to women's hockey rules where, yeah, body contact is a penalty. But in the women's game, you're still allowed to rub out along the boards. You're still allowed to scrum in the corners in front of the net. She says no no contact, period. Any contact will be a penalty. Well, when you drop the puck at a face-off, there's battles there. There's incidental battles all over the ice. So how do you take that out? And you put a lot of pressure on the refs to try and police that, like I said, because that's instinct for those players. They think to engage physically at every opportunity, and now they're told they can't. So, and at the same time, you got them sitting right next to each other on a bench. So, and they're sweating and everything else. So, I mean, how is that any safer than the body contact that occurs in a hockey game? And while we're on it, the UFFL, the Ultimate Fantasy Fighting League Mixed Martial Arts, there's UFC fights every week. There's tons of other MMA promotions going. Watch a fight and look at those guys lying on top of each other, breathing with, very close quarters. The amount of physical contact in mixed martial arts is 10 times what you see in a hockey game. And certainly when they're the wrestling aspects and the grappling aspects, they're literally breathing on each other for 5 minutes straight at a time. And yes, they're tested ahead of the event that they're COVID-free, but still, I mean, things can happen. And it's just interesting that there's no body contact in hockey, but some of these other sports like mixed martial arts, which was one of the first sports to come back and has basically had very minimal positive tests throughout this process. They haven't had to scrap many fights due to a fighter testing positive for COVID. So I think you look at the success MMA has had with a very full contact sport. Boxing as well has been going strong lately. And it's just hard to fathom you take body checking out of hockey when those sports that are twice as physical are going on with very minimal positive tests. So hopefully, like I said, smarter minds prevail, and there will be rules will be as normal, full contact for the OHL come February.
Yeah, I think you made a great point. If you have this rule for the OHL, how is it different for the Leafs? If they do have the bubble in Toronto or wherever it is, in Ontario. But I think the important thing is that the NHL has already proved, and I don't know if the OHL, I don't know if they're planning bubbles or doing similar to the NHL, but I don't even believe there was even a positive COVID case in the whole NHL bubble that I can think of. So they proved to the sporting world that they could exercise this entire thing with precision and expertise, and I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely amazed at how they pulled off a very, very successful Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yeah, I believe they tested upwards of 35,000 tests over that 2-month, 3-month period and 0 positives. So that was a resounding success for the NHL, the way they created their bubble environment. But you're right, in the OHL, I don't know if they're necessarily looking at bubbles. They haven't discussed that yet. But if they are traveling and going from city to city and then they're in different hotels and different restaurants, and you can see how, we're seeing it in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League right now in the QMJHL. There have been several teams that have been postponing games and suspending games due to a player on their roster testing positive for COVID. So COVID is certainly, the pandemic has had some implications on the QMJHL, which started in October, a couple months ahead of the Western Hockey League and the OHL, which was surprising that the QMJHL went ahead with that timeline, but they have had some complications with COVID. And certainly overseas, you look at the KHL, there's been a number of games, again, suspended or postponed, and certain rosters are at half capacity. They've had to call up junior players because their pro players have COVID. So it has impacted the hockey world, the leagues that are running right now. But again, those leagues are all playing full contact. They do have travel, everything else, whereas the NHL has been very centralized and the way they did it, as well as most professional sporting leagues. The NBA was the same. They had barely any positive tests, although they did have some. But the NFL is going. Baseball just wrapped up with the World Series. And I think that the professional sporting leagues can afford, obviously, more testing, better bubbles, more security, all that sort of stuff. So I understand it's a little harder to pull off at the junior level, including funding. If there's no fans, the leagues are going to struggle even at half capacity to break even. So it's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard road ahead for these junior leagues in Canada. Whether or not we see a Memorial Cup come June is a very big question mark in my mind. But hopefully, if they do drop the puck, we'll have regular rules, full contact, what we've always known and expected of the OHL. Like you said, most of all for the kids' sake.
Well, I think, as you said, let's hope smarter minds prevail. I honestly can't see if there is a player in the OHL playing. He is asymptomatic. He's positive for COVID. Whether or not there's body checking allowed, I can't see it making a difference. So yeah, we'll see what happens. It's a big topic, and it could change a lot of things if it is enforced and they do find positives out of it. I can guarantee you that we might see a trickle down effect or trickle up effect. So we'll see. Let's hope. Keeping my fingers crossed that they keep the game as it should be, in my opinion.
Yeah, and hopefully, like I said, hopefully we get some fans in the building, because I know junior hockey, they're very dependent on fan and ticket revenue as well. So hopefully the local health ministers and hopefully COVID trends down in the next couple months. I know it's been flaring there in Manitoba and even here in British Columbia. The numbers are trending up, but hopefully throughout the winter months, we see that trend go the other direction and it becomes safer or more acceptable for fans in the buildings, because that's the teams are reliant on that revenue, and certainly, hopefully, as fans go, hopefully scouts can get back in the building too, because I'm itching to see some live hockey at the major junior level, because watching the guys play in front of me in beer league's not quite the same.
No, I don't imagine it would be. It's a whole different perspective. Beers in the parking lot compared to paying a few dollars for a ticket and having beer in a nice, comfortable seat. Well, let's hope for normalcy. I know we're all waiting for that. And one thing that I can assure everybody is that the UFHL is going to continue to develop, become stronger, and everything we do is in the best interest of the franchise owners, the general managers associated with, and the scouts that take part in our platform. And of course, we're continuing to build, as you already mentioned, Larry. The UFFL is starting to take shape, and that's probably for a whole entirely another show. So we won't get into that here today. So that's a wrap on episode number 10 on this UFFS podcast. And I want to thank you again, Fish, for your time and your expertise and your encyclopedic mind that you have on all things hockey and other sports I know as well. And I'm Darren Bates saying see ya from all of us here at UFFF Sports, where you own the game.